I'm constantly in awe at the different things that can be done. The ideas are just constantly evolving. People who don't use AI, it's those people who are going to be affected. One of the AI projects that we are looking at is when we're having a conversation and the surgeon and the patient, or the clinician and the patient, a letter is being generated by AI. Can you imagine how much time is then being saved? Revolutionise the way care is done within their organisation, and that's their vision and their goal. So everybody's on a journey. So I think whichever aspect of healthcare we're in, it's always going to be that continuous learning curve.
Irrum Afzal, lovely to have you here. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me here today. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. So we're going to let everyone know who you are, what you do. I think you're very fascinating. I think you've got some incredible experience and a good journey to a place which I think is going to be fascinating for the evolution of AI, digital transformation. So from the beginning, give us a little idea of who you are and where you began.
Sure. So I'm Iram. I started my journey off in research. So I went to university thinking I would do medicine, but I was very sort of scared of blood. Went into theatre when I was 14 with my uncle, and he was doing a case. And I remember standing there and being like, this smells like cheesy Wotsits. I really don't like the smell of this, and I feel like I'm going to faint. And I fainted. I just collapsed in theatre, and I was like, that's it. I don't want to ever go back into a hospital setting, into anything like this. And then I saw my grandmother have a knee replacement done. And just seeing how, and in the initial phases, seeing how much her life like changed after having the knee replacement, I was really fascinated by like, actually, wow, this is pretty impressive. And then before we knew it, she hated her knee replacement. But I was then very fortunate to do work experience at the South West London Elective Orthopaedic Centre, and they had a research department there. And when I went to the research department, I was like, actually, this is giving me a combination of like stuff I actually like learning about the healthcare, but not actually having to go into theatre and being there. And so I was in my second year of university when I did the work experience there. And I really enjoyed my time and learning about all the different aspects of research that was being undertaken. I was like, I can utilise my university degree here and also then develop upon this. So I then went on to do a Master's of Public Health, where I then looked at a particular piece of like research, and I've developed my time in the South West London Elective Orthopaedic Centre. And more recently, I've moved to HCA, which is the Healthcare America, and they are a group of private hospitals in central London. And I'm currently working on a project there looking at digital health transformation. And so they're having a new electronic patient record system implemented into all their facilities, into all their hospitals, and they're utilising what's called the Meditech Expanse system from America. And it's just amazing to see how, you know, how important having a good electronic patient record system is in place. So at the South West London Elective Orthopaedic Centre, they also have, it's amazing just to see how so many hospitals have so many different systems that then you're like logging into one, and by the time you're like logged into the next. So working in that space is definitely interesting, and it's just going to change, like, and it's something that's needed. So some hospitals are still using paper records. So
How have you found that then? Because just to give some context for
yeah,
everyone. So obviously the NHS, we in the UK know what it is. For the international listeners or watchers, that's the national healthcare system of the United Kingdom, so available to the public. And here there's always been the debate, public or private, and HCA are private. You've seen both worlds, and we discussed before turning the cameras on the difference between what we think something is and what it's actually like. My interpretation of the healthcare system, or just generally healthcare, was very, very different before. began to deal with surgeons and intensivists and people in and around that world. Give some insight to what is the healthcare system actually like, the working healthcare publicly, and then how's it appeared to see the other side of it?
So it's actually really interesting to see like the differences. So in the National Health Service, and so it's a free service. It's available to anybody and everyone. So there's lots going on there, but there's so much happening there that sometimes things can take longer to be seen, and you have to sort of accept that. But also with the private healthcare, you're paying for a service, so you expect that service to be, if you want an appointment, you are choosing to have that appointment tomorrow, or you can have it whenever is next available. Whereas in the NHS, you have to sort of accept. So I think that's one of the differences from a patient perspective is, accepting that you get what you're given when something is free. But if you're paying for something, you get what you choose for. So I think that's one of the differences. But in terms of the healthcare, the way the systems are run in the NHS and the private, I think one of the biggest differences that I found is the efficiency of the way things are done and the obstacles that are put into place in when doing something. So if you want to achieve something in the NHS, you have to go through various different hoops and obstacles, and you have to do the same within the private healthcare system as well. But I think the acceptance and the support that's given is slightly more in the private, because they're ultimately a business, and they have deliverables to meet. And within the NHS, it's sort of bit more free floating is the way I found it.
And I suppose one of the benefits, and without getting to the political side of it, just purely observing the functions of the two, and you're absolutely right. As a business, they want to provide the best service,
Yeah.
and they're reliant upon that for customers in effect.
Yeah.
But one thing that I suppose that doesn't allow for so much is research. So research is, it sounds like one of the great loves that you had within the space. Describe some of the work that you've been involved in and the people that you work with, which touches upon AI now.
Yeah, so I've worked at the South West London Electrical Orthopaedic Centre. We started our journey in AI, and it's been exceptional just to see the growth of what is available and what can be done. So I've worked with Professor Diari Kader, who's got a great interest and a passion and a vision for AI, and just seeing what can be done and what is done. So I've got a real interest in research, and I ran with him. We used to do a research course, which was called the London Research Course, and started off about 6 years ago. And in that course, we had a program which was teaching people how to do research. So we've got a passion for research, and we wanted to make sure that people around us also learn how to do research efficiently and effectively. So we taught them all sorts of different aspects of research. So for example, from data analysis, literature review, writing, and also then disseminating your work. So all that was taught in a day. And so Prof Kader had this vision of teaching people. And I remember him one day coming to me, and I sat in the office, and he said, "I want to do this research course." And I said, "Okay, Prof, I'm like let's go ahead, let's do it." And he was like, "Okay, find a venue." And we started off. So we are the South West London Elective Orthopaedic Centre is based in Epsom. And we looked up a venue, and we did our first course at the Holiday Inn down the road from where we started, and it was a day course. And then we developed, and we built upon that, and we went to Central Hall, Westminster, and we then have developed, and we had even during COVID, we were able to do a webinar, and we had nearly over 500 people attend this webinar. And then more recently, we've seen it's a great course, it's worked, but AI is going to change the way things are done, research is done. So where we work, we've seen, just all the different platforms and softwares that we can use. So we thought the AI course, and I remember Prof Kader saying this to me, that the research course that we run, so I was saying to him, let's do it again, we need to do it again. And he was like, actually, we need to change the way we teach people, because what we'll be teaching people is a history lesson. No one's going to be interested in learning how to do statistics the way it used to be done. We need to be using tools, and now there's so many tools that are available out there that make your life so much more efficient. Like, we recently run a course, and in that journey of putting together that course and understanding, I've learned just so much. So I didn't personally use all those tools, but hearing about all those tools that are available. So the task that was set to people was to go and find out about different tools of ways research can be done, and hearing them come back with Julius, coming back with Research Rabbit, all these different tools can just change the way someone can publish a paper. So where people spent hours, days searching, trolling through literature, can be done within seconds. So I'm really fortunate to have just recently been on that journey to identify, and it just leaves me just so much more motivated, excited to go and find out more.
So there's a huge amount of potential.
Yeah,
But
definitely. There's
what,
so much more potential.
so one thing which I've always wondered, and I mean it's probably very obvious, but why do research? What's the point? What's the hope to achieve something? To what benefit will it deliver? Is it for a personal basis? Is it because you're looking for a cure for cancer? I mean, it's probably a very simplistic way of putting it, but what's the entire journey of research, and why is it so important?
So research, I find research fascinating because it's like, you're trying to answer a question. Like, there's so much, like, the reason I find it interesting is there's just so much unknown out there. And so by going and finding out information, by doing like searches, by really understanding the topic, that's what I find interesting, because then you can make a meaningful, impactful change. Like, on, like, so with medicine and with like orthopedics, for example, there's so much information out there, but how do you know what is actually, what's actually the correct way of doing things? What's the way? So surgeons are doing, hip replacements, knee replacements on a daily basis, but they could be doing that repetitively, the same thing. But over time, things need to change. And with research, so by looking at that data, they can make changes to then ultimately improve patient care. If they improve patient care, that will ultimately have an impact on like society. So it's really like, it's not just, I think, really, I find research really interesting. It's not just one thing that's changed. Has a bigger, meaningful, more impactful change. That's what I find really interesting.
Well, it's interesting because the time spent in Iraq, one of the hospitals that we spent time filming for Beyond the Beach was a prosthetics center which had been set up, and I mean we saw all sorts of people who'd lost limbs primarily due to landmines, including this beautiful young girl who, I mean, it's a tragic story. When she was, I don't know, 4 years old, absolutely tiny, she stepped on a landmine which killed her mum and her dad, and was amputated pretty much up to the top of her legs, and was taken into the care of obviously other family, but had been brought up with prosthetics for free from this NGO, um, who introduced us to a lot of people who had then got their lives back. And it became clear one of the reasons for using landmines was to demoralize the perceived enemy through the kind of the general populace, because someone with a disability after an amputation would be considered a burden on the rest of society. So it's a horrifically cynical approach and weapon.
Yeah.
And for it to almost be commonplace, and to have happened to so many children as well after the legacy of a war, really, for me personally, brought home what it really meant to actually give people their life back. And even talking about the workshops that they would set up in order to transform the accessibility of a home, because suddenly if you're in a very different position and that ability is no longer there, then your entire life changes in ways that people can't imagine. And if we were to consider those sort of factors and think more personally, how would it affect us and be more relatable, then I think there's there's elements even within orthopedics which can make a huge difference.
Huge difference, like huge difference. I just seeing people's life change after, even like a knee replacement. Like often our surgeons will receive, thank you letters because their lives have changed. These surgeons have made a life, they're doing a life-changing procedure. And I recently read a quote actually. It was like a surgeon goes to work every day and that's their day-to-day work. But for a patient, that day that they're coming to have their hip or knee replacement or any procedure, that's one of the most important days in their life. So for a surgeon, they're just going to work, they're going to do their like a routine surgery. But for that patient, it's going to be a life-changing procedure. Some of them may be able to, start playing golf again, and it's really, really, really life-changing for them.
And the families.
And families, friends, all the people around them. And just like, they could be doing all sorts of different things that they wanted to, and their life could have changed, just like particularly with trauma. Like their life can change overnight. Like they could have like an accident or something and their life can change overnight. So by having all these different procedures, having all this research that's like doing all the research behind that can make changes is, I think it plays an important role in healthcare. And I think research is like people often see it as like a small part of the hospital, but actually it does have a big impact. I've always felt that research is like, people always see research in hospitals being a small aspect of it, but I think has a big meaningful impact is the way I see it.
So AI as a part of that. So I think the importance of research, I mean, even in this little conversation, if we were to kind of build a picture for the audience, so there is a very powerful, meaningful impact to doing research, which could create much better outcomes. The scale, and you alluded to that at the beginning of the conversation, the scale of data that you're dealing with, the separate systems. Let's explore the problem of that a bit further, because that plays into obviously your role at HCA as well with digital transformation.
Yeah. So within any sort of organization in the NHS, typically they have multiple systems that they're using. So you have one EPR system for one aspect of the patient journey, and then another EPR system, which is an electronic patient record system, for another part of the journey. So just giving an example, in our orthopedic unit, we have at least 4 different systems. So the patient has a preoperative assessment, they use one system, then the patient clinical records are in another system, and then the theatre documentation is another system, and then we do postoperative outcome data, which is looking at patients' procedures postoperatively. So it's asking patients to fill out questionnaires postoperatively. And that's on another system. So I've just listed out four different systems that are being used. And whilst the electronic patient record system is one system that is collecting all of them, it is very fragmented. And I think the need for AI is to get all those systems together, because it's not going to, because every hospital is using lots of different systems. So what I would really love to see is one day where all these systems are connected together and we have like visual dashboards of just seeing how the country's National Health Service is doing. So you can really follow that. Like that's one way where I would really love to see AI play its part, just to connect all different systems to see, because the scale of data, we alone are looking at like 60,000 patients data record from when we first started. And if you extrapolate that across the country for all the different orthopedic units, how much data is there to be used?
And that's just the UK.
That's just the UK.
If you add up worldwide, to begin to understand, because humans are probably the same everywhere. I'm not saying that different countries have different conditions, hot, cold, etc. And this is part of the work we're undertaking on the project we're working on together.
Which is fascinating.
And I think it's interesting that if you ask the average lay person what benefit AI would have in healthcare, it's actually applicable across all businesses. That data tends to be in all these different pockets. If you can make it agnostic, first off, that data becomes available. And then one thing that we generally are very supportive of and believe in is subject matter expertise,
Yeah.
where it's almost irreplaceable to take away from the knowledge of someone who has done the job for many, many years.
Yeah.
And again, irrespective of sector, we're talking healthcare now, but a surgeon, I mean, Professor Cater, for example, he instinctively knows how everything works, all the things that many people wouldn't think of.
Yeah.
But typically, healthcare systems tend to be so siloed with the different functions that the dots aren't connected. So, I mean, what's your understanding and vision, and understanding of Professor Cater's vision of that entire pathway with AI?
Yeah, so with the silo systems, so with all the different ones, they're working so independently, but if you're able to have those all interconnected and having outputs that people are able to see, I think one of the biggest things with AI is having that visual representation of what can actually be done. So for example, with having like one system where x-rays are being analysed. So for example, looking at, Prof. Cater can instinctively just look at an x-ray, he'll know what's wrong with it. But if he has a system that can then look at 10,000 x-rays, or even look at like a day's worth of x-rays, and then the ones that are flagged up to him that have a problem, that's saving him a lot of time to go and utilize that time and his skills elsewhere. But also it's still, all his x-rays are still being analyzed. So connecting all of, I think there's so much that can be done with all the different systems.
I think there's also another aspect of that,
Yeah.
where, for example, he has huge expertise,
Yeah.
where you have, and again, something we can get on to about the hierarchical nature and people training and learning and coming up and having all the different grades. How can someone who's 2 years in have the experience and recognize something of someone who's got 40 years experience? And I always think of it as the Superman approach.
Yeah.
And something I think we're going to talk about with Professor Song at some point. And one of the guests that we've got coming up, who's a fascinating special forces guy, where if you could imagine training a subject matter expert that suddenly people all across the world, I mean, take any big name, Marie Curie or Einstein or any rock and roll star, famous writer, if you're engaging in any activity and you could have them there and it was suddenly available to thousands of people who are also taking that path, and maybe would think, well, what would you do? Well, there was this time I had this particular situation and it looked like one thing, but actually it was another problem. Of course, the body's a hugely complex thing. So often new shoes can give you a headache, which sounds crazy, but it could affect your balance and then your spine and then tense up muscles. And again, goes back to research, understanding the root of the problem.
Yeah, and understanding like the root cause and where the problem is coming from. And I think that's what AI is going to change. And because AI isn't just artificial intelligence, there's so much to it. There's like machine learning, natural language processing, generative AI. There's so much that can be done, and so many systems and so many processes that can be streamlined. And without scaring people, there's so much that can be done that will then make. I think one of the ways I see and one of the visions I see for AI, artificial intelligence, is to make people's lives more efficient. So, and that's where I see, and like I've just seen like the changes that I've seen with the projects that we've been doing with Professor Cater and what his vision is to make things more efficient. He's always been about efficiency and driving innovation through making things change for the better.
Right, quality. It's
Quality,
infusing
yeah,
quality.
like making sure that everything is like of good quality, and it's driving change that will make people have a strong meaningful impact. So one of the projects that we're looking at, and which I think will be a game changer if it works. So surgeons are seeing patients in clinic, they then have to send documentation, write letters, and because patients want a letter of the conversation that they've had, and the surgeon often has to get the dictaphone out, start dictating their letter either in front of the patient or after the patient. That is obviously a little bit time consuming if they're having to do that for every patient. And historically, every surgeon, any clinician does that. So they do that. But one of the AI projects that we are looking at the South West London Elective Orthopaedic Centre is when we're having a conversation and the surgeon and the patient, or the clinician and the patient is having a conversation with the patient and the family. That conversation is being recorded, and then a letter is being generated by that conversation. Can you imagine how much time is then being saved? That letter is then populated. It's there in front of the clinician, the surgeon has to cast their eye over it, make sure it's accurate, done.
But also from a time perspective, let's say you're the patient and I'm the surgeon, so I write the letter. You're awaiting results or guidance or a referral. What is it currently without that, and what could it be using AI?
So currently it's, it's 7 to 10 working days, and sometimes it can be longer than that. I've often had an appointment letter, which I haven't had a letter come through for a few weeks. And that's had no fault of any individual, but it's often just what it is. But they do have, like regulations of having it 7 to 10 days. But with AI, you can leave the hospital with your letter, that's what I find almost, fascinating. Like
So it's potentially much better for the patient.
Definitely,
So
100%.
because this is a fear. I mean, if you look at the normal rhetoric, AI is going to take your jobs. AI is going to be smarter. And I think there are a couple of different topics here. I mean, you've already identified there are multiple different types of AI.
Yeah.
So if people were more educated, and you've got to think, why are people not so educated? I don't think it's the fault of the public.
No.
I think it's more the interest of the major players saying it's too complicated, it's going to do everything, it's going to do this, it's going to do that. And when you really look under the surface and you're highly qualified to understand and to be able to communicate that, they're like a car or a bus or a motorbike. They're all modes of transport, but they're wildly different for different purposes.
And it's exactly that's what AI is. There's different forms of AI, and AI is not going to take anybody's job. It's more going to make people's lives more efficient. It's going to. So I recently actually had Professor Kada say a quote where he said, AI isn't going to take surgeons' jobs. It's going to make people who don't use AI. It's those people who are going to be affected, and that really left me thinking. I was just like, actually, that's so true, because if you're not using AI, you will be left behind. So it's about just learning, and even learning like the basic principles. Lots of people now, ChatGPT is a big thing, and lots of people are using it. But it's just even starting off, just accepting and really learning from the basics.
Well, a good example, which is a comparison, robotic laparoscopic surgery.
Yeah.
Initially, because one of the inventors was someone we knew, and he told me the story of when he was British, but he went to the US, and when he presented the idea of it, all the surgeons were like, absolutely not. You're gonna try to take our jobs. Then eventually one started to use it. Now it was the patient comes in, they're prepped, there's a hospital bed needed, they would do the surgery, there would be a day, potentially 2 days recovery time. So that could be 3, 4, possibly 5 days for surgery with a lot of resource, and that bed was then allocated. So the surgeon also would get paid for that one surgery. However, when they realized the patient could be in and out the same day, worst case, 1 to 2 days, and they could do more surgeries, get paid more. Suddenly the surgeons that were using robotic surgery were actually making 5 to 10 times more than the ones who said it's going to take our jobs. Absolutely not. And for the patients, they were at lesser risk, and they were able to have a much quicker turnaround, which was more convenient and actually a better outcome for the patient. So what appears on the surface, when you rationalize it and look at what the benefit is to all stakeholders, actually that's the way to look at it.
That's like, it's multiple people, and it's just like making it's that mind shift change, I think. It's that mind shift where people need to know of the benefits, and looking at the pros and cons of everything, because everything comes with its cons as well it does as with its pros. But it's just that mind shift where people need to just be, I think one thing I've learned, people are very resistant to change, and when there's change, like it's humans, like people are resistant to change, where people are comfortable doing what they're doing, why change? You know, people like, even like going back to the healthcare examples, you know, in my time at Swelliok, I've seen like a big shift of just, you know, patients like leaving hospital in like, you know, on the same day. My grandma, when she had her knee replacement done, she stayed in hospital for 14 days, and she had it done in a private healthcare, and she stayed in hospital 14 days. You wouldn't ever hear of that now. Like, and that was in 2000, and you know, back in 2000, and I think it was like 6 or something, she had her knee replaced, and 14 days. But now someone stays in hospital, you know, so it's alarming if someone stays in hospital for 14 days.
It is. I mean, usually that
Like,
indicates there's
there's a problem
an infection or a problem of
or
some sort.
and that's again like a mind shift change. You know, like now you see, you know, patients and are leaving hospital on the same day, or like a day after, 2 days later, and it's so I think in anything, and particularly with AI, I think people are, one of the big things is accepting the change. I think like just learning about it, just being, you know, actually learn about what changes are gonna take place, what will be, how will your life become different if you embrace AI. I think people should embrace it, is the way I see it.
Also, from your perspective, what do you think people are already using? I mean, if you were to say to the average layperson who's potentially a little afraid of AI, and you had to convince them, what would you give them evidence of that actually they've already been using it for a long time?
So there's like, you know, there's lots of different like sectors that are using it. So AI is being used in, you know, in facial recognition. That's one thing. You know, when you go to the airport and stuff, you know, your face is being recognized, and that is some form of AI. So just explaining to people that, you know, your data isn't going to be taken away, and hearing from you earlier, just, you know, about your credit history as well. That's something that's been, where people have been using that for a long time. So I think it's really, I think the way to convince people is to give them personal experiences and talk them through lived examples of where they've been using it, and they will be using it in all aspects of their life. Their data is being, you know, shared with multiple different, anything that you know, I was talking to my friend who works in advertising, and she was just telling me about, you know, how when we talk about something, it's often like being listened to, and we get ads. So that's a form of AI, because we're getting personalized ads which are being sent to us.
That could be dinged a little naughty though.
Yes.
So I I think there's probably two sides, and as you said, there's a positive and a negative.
Yeah.
On a generalized basis, one bad example, I think, is the idea that everything is generalized and averaged out.
Yeah.
So it's kind of making everything really average, but the future applied properly,
Yeah.
and the AI, which is really going to have a positive impact on people's lives, is actually something that makes good better,
Yes.
or efficient more efficient, or solve problems which maybe we didn't even realize are problems.
I think that's where it is. Like, you know, where there'll be so much that can be solved. There'll be so much that can be done a lot quicker, just in terms of, you know, application forms. You know, things that will be done a lot quicker, and which can be like streamlined. Like, for one example, that will be streamlined. We have job adverts that we put out. We get lots of applications. We have to go through all of them individually. AI could revolutionize that, and, you know, help, and it's not about taking things away from us, but it's augmenting and supporting. And I think that's one of the things that is where AI is going to like be the future, where it's going to support people to do things more efficiently.
I think if you look at it on the basis that, music again a good example of that, but look at it on the basis of what are you trying to achieve,
Yeah.
and often you'll begin to look and say, right, I've got to achieve that, but there's 100 things that need to be done. So often things will be skipped, or it's just not possible to address properly. So if elements of AI can help reach the conclusions that matter and almost get rid of the noise. And a good example of the amount of data created, we alluded to it in one of the original podcasts, and I forget the figure now, but it's something like every 18 months, the amount of data created and existing in the world doubles. So that means there's more and more and more and more information, but we're pretty much the same number of people, and we're trying to get the same outcome. But that just means we're looking for the same needles in bigger and bigger haystacks. So I think there's a very practical element to it, but it does have to be on the basis of what does good look like? Why does good look like good? Why does bad look like bad? And what are we trying to achieve? And if it can help with those objectives, then there's huge benefit to be sourced.
There's huge benefit. There's so many different examples in like the healthcare that it will change, and it will revolutionize the way things that are done, and where then resources can be utilized, where people are doing things manually. If you have a question or something that needs to be done, it's like that can then be utilized. For example, lots of patients come through with their appointments, but then having to triage that into the right clinics. If something can support that, it will then save people having to do that. They can then oversee it. So it will definitely support and augment the way things work.
And from a human perspective, all of these people within the system are patients, probably in pain. I mean, you only really go to the hospital when if you've got a problem. So we're talking about a sector of society that's suffering. And if we can reduce the suffering, then that has to be a good thing.
That has to.
And it goes back to like the reason, like why I said, about research, not like what's the point, but there is a point.
There's a point, and there's data out there that, so every procedure, everything that's happening, there's data that's being collected. And whether it's being collected in a form to be used for research or not, there is data that's being collected. And going through the correct research ethical governance processes, once you've passed all of that, you can then look at that data and then, look at it, write it up. And that's what AI is going to change. If you've got that data, softwares like, Julius AI can analyze that data for you within, minutes, hours. We looked at a piece of work where we compared a human researcher doing data analysis compared to an AI software doing the analysis. And one of the differences we found was the amount of time that it took. It took the researcher 9 hours to do it. It took the AI software 30 minutes. So that time can then be utilized for that individual or that researcher to use softwares to then write up the paper. And it's not saying that the software is going to completely write up the paper for you, because there is some element of, your expertise, your knowledge that is required. So for example, if Professor Cade is writing a paper on his expertise on knee surgery, if he's doing a paper on knee surgery, the software isn't going to write the paper entirely for him. He's going to need to go back and make sure that it reads in the way, edit it, write it up. So in that same time that he's written one paper using AI, or he would have done in the time not using AI, that he'll be able to do so much more. So I think that's one of the things that it will really change the way people can deliver their output of work.
Because I mean, something I found fascinating when it was originally described to me, on average, for a very comprehensive research program, could take 5 months worth of data collection. I mean, I've known many young doctors, surgeons who have described that in a 6-month study, 5 months of it being data collection. And I mean, that's the rate limiting factor. I mean, this is why we got involved, to help address that, because it is the fundamental problem.
It's one of the biggest problems.
And then also on top of that, it's the layer of, I mean, like GAEA, we always talk about trust and truth, data validation, and then continuous learning. So to consider data as a
flow, more
like liquid,
like a data lake type thing. So I still remember the first time that when you came and when we spoke about the project, And I just remember, like, I've always seen lots of fragmented systems. There's very few systems that are, that have one electronic patient record system that outputs all the data. So wherever I've worked, whatever I've seen, I've only known it to be very fragmented. And I just remember, like, hearing you talk about, bringing all that data together. I was there fascinated. I was like, we have to do this. We want to. And I remember leaving that meeting and just being like, I've got a vision. I can see all this data. If we can actually merge all this data, we can then have a screen in management offices, a screen wherever we want, showing us all the data that we collect. So just being able to see that sort of like data lake, and one of the things I found fascinating was that, it's not just going to be that data that we have already collected, but it will be that constant data once you've gone through all the ethical, regulatory approvals.
This is an important part of it, because it's, yes, historical to give context, the interaction and what are you trying to choose, but the flow of data, but to always protect people's privacy, to always make sure everything is safe, because the answers which can move the needle, that can deliver from a surgeon standpoint, surgery booker, I'm not sure the exact terminology, but there are many roles, many responsibilities, and if the people who need to understand information can find out the information pertinent to them making better decisions in a more efficient manner, but across the board where the dots are connected. And like one person lose something here, which will affect the outcome over here, but it can just be fluid and together. I think that's the basis to then say, well, artificial intelligence can then be on the subject matter basis to understand what good looks like. But it's all possible then.
Seeing that actually be able to come to life, like seeing the way the differences, like you mentioned, the different time points, the different data collection aspects, bringing that all together, joining the dots together.
But the geotemporal element, I mean, time space, we exist in time space. 2 hours ago, 2 years ago, obviously everything changes. We have the seasons, different things affect us. That to me is common sense. If we're going to describe everything, then let's describe it and be accurate.
And I found that really fascinating. So part of my master's degree was epidemiology, so I did public health. So it was like there was a lot of epidemiology that was involved in it. And even in my bachelor's degree, the project that I wrote was I looked at the change of the Spanish influenza. So I looked at that, so from 1918 and how that. So we looked back at so one of the pieces of work that I had to do was go to the National Archives and look up all those records of the patients who had suffered from the Spanish flu. And I remember when you spoke about geo-temporal and all of that, it was just like eye-catching and eye-opening. For someone who studied epidemiology, I was just like, wow, like if we can bring all this together, if we can see all this, and just hearing you talk about it. And I remember the demonstration that you gave us and showing us that heat map. And that heat map, that explanation of that heat map of how an individual changes, and the example you gave us was like weather. And it was just incredible. And I think by explaining it to someone in those format, I think is like, even for me, who's someone who studied epidemiology, fascinating.
I think it's common sense. It's instinctive, and half of the problem that we have as humans, we live at the pace that time is. I mean, it sounds silly. You look at the watch, it's like 1, 2, 3. But if you're to zoom out and just zoom back really, really quickly, then what's the difference between an ice age? And then you can begin to understand the cause and effect. If you can zoom out in scale, yet appreciate the individual, of course, even what we wear, winter or summer, geospatially, if we're in the Arctic as opposed to in Sudan in the summer, obviously, but that obvious becomes non-obvious at the pace we exist in life.
And I think that was something that, when you explained that to us about that example that you gave us, particularly with like weather, we sort of live in a world where you kind of just, you go about your day, you don't really realize that until someone comes and like explains it to you, like that sort of like, actually things change around you. So things are changing around us so rapidly, and we're so oblivious to those rapid changes.
Even air pollution.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at different cities, look at major causes of respiratory issues, but even the time of year. I mean, my cat and the Alsatian who runs around here freely most of the time has hay fever, but doesn't have hay fever in autumn, which I mean is obvious. But sometimes you wake up and why do you feel rubbish?
Yeah.
And you think, well, it's pretty obvious because there's pollen everywhere. You can see it caked over the cars. But how does that affect the hospital? And if you've got resources and demand, I mean, I know there's been issues at different times with oxygen. What if there's no oxygen delivery at the hospital, or the demand goes up? These become logistical issues, and it's right there in front of us.
Yeah, it's right. Like those problems are like there in front of us, and those problems are problems that people often, like, sometimes you just don't think those problems are actually going to be problems. You kind of just think that, oxygen will always be in a hospital, but actually, like, we need to be mindful that these things actually, we're very grateful that we have all of that, but often it can just not be there. So it's about being, and like, like you said about, like sometimes waking up and being like, actually, I don't feel great. Like that does have like, it's not just one thing that can have an impact. Like, being like a grey winter's day, that can change the way someone feels compared to someone on a hot summer's day.
Yeah, I mean, what was it? SAD?
Yeah,
Is it
seasonal.
seasonal affective disorder?
Yeah,
I mean, all of these things, even if you're a Premier League footballer,
yeah,
and imagine, I mean, obviously from a music background as well, I know what it's like for an artist to be on a stage
yeah,
in front of tens of thousands of people. But if you're a footballer and you're in front of 50, 60,000 people and you make a mistake and everyone's just screaming at you, and then on social media people are slating you, your own mental health. I mean, one of the projects that our team are doing is uh, a mental health awareness week film for a client, and the same circumstance but a different time because of a different reason,
yeah,
and your own state of mind can lead to a completely different outcome.
yeah,
And
absolutely.
especially within a hospital,
Yeah, within the hospital.
where you have
Yeah,
deaths, you
I have
have
like, and things are changing, and you say, how you feel can affect the outcome. And so one of the things that we do at the orthopedic centres, we collect patient reported outcomes, which I mentioned earlier. And that is, we're asking a patient to fill out a questionnaire on how they feel. So it's a series of questions on how your hip replacement is, and or knee replacement, or whatever procedure you've had, for example. And one of the questions is, how do you feel? How do you feel today? And often the answer can be and it's from 0 to 100, and how do you feel in yourself? And it really is just a matter of how you're feeling on that day. So some people can put like 70, but they really could be feeling, on another day could be feeling 100, but it's that day. So it really does have an impact. So I think one of those small changes can make a big impact.
and also if you consider, you know, background experience, job, socioeconomic. I mean, if you spoke to any of the SAS guys after a surgery and how are you feeling,
Yeah.
they're like, fine.
Yeah.
And they could actually be in a lot of pain, but they've lived a life where that's not really what you do. You don't complain.
Yeah.
And you could speak to someone who a little bit of pain, but they're actually fine. But perhaps lived a life where they're a hypochondriac and it's all blown out of proportion.
It's all.
But then from a research perspective,
It's.
if you're then ascertaining an emotional reaction on a particular day, under particular circumstances, which could be highly variable, upon an actual physical operation using a particular component
Yeah.
piece from a manufacturer, then of course there has to be consideration for all other data
all other
points.
things. Yeah, so we've done like projects where we've then taken into account looking at confounding variables, looking at people's, you know, socioeconomical status, looking at like gender, looking at age, so taking all those into consideration, because all of those have an effect on, you know, the outcome. And it is identifying, and it's making sure. So one of the things I learned in my when I was doing my master's was about making sure that you take into account all the confounding variables that you just mentioned. So whether it's looking for, you know, whether you're doing like an epidemiology piece of work, whether you're doing a piece of work that's not like a non-epidemiology piece, you have to take all those confounding variables. And that was one of the things that was honed into us for all our exams: confounding variables, confounding variables.
Well, I think even as you're describing
Yeah.
that, and I think it's extremely important.
Yeah.
And as we're generally discussing
Yeah.
this, it raises, I think, the value in addressing how AI will be able to achieve something
Yeah.
others wouldn't, which is the sheer scale.
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably talk for hours and go, oh, what about that factor? What about that factor? You could go forever. And if you're individually, even as a small team,
Yeah.
addressing a problem, where do you end? Well, you could look at
And
everything.
and that is, you know, we have a research meeting Thursday morning at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you know, it's one part of the week that I really look forward to, and it's because, you know, the ideas are just constantly evolving, and you know, it's just all every week there's you know, there's a project, and sometimes, you know, change can take longer than expected, but it is, you know, it's all of those ideas that you build upon. And you know, I particularly, you know, the having those like discussions and chats with, you know, Prof Kada, when he comes through, he has one idea, but then speaking to we have a team of data scientists, and they have all recently just completed their masters in various different aspects of AI, but it's just all the different endless topics that that can be done. You know, we started off with one project, and now we've got so many different going on, and that's not the end, that's only the beginning.
But I think that's a really important point
Yeah.
too. It's all the different perspectives
Yeah.
enrich the bigger
Yeah.
picture.
Which I think is really important, and we're very fortunate to be able to have the different experienced people who are coming together, and it's a really multidisciplinary multidisciplinary team, really, because it's not just you know, in healthcare, it's the surgeons, the clinicians, the nurses, the doctors, but the data scientists, you know, their ideas, you know, they are sat in meetings, they're listening, they're, you know, hearing all this information, hearing the surgeons talk about all these different ideas. But then they're like listening in carefully, and then they're coming back with, actually, you know, Prof, we could do this, we could just, and you know, I really, really love just seeing them come through with these ideas. You know, you're just hearing them, actually, Prof, we could do this, and it's really lovely to see that so much can be done.
Oh, it's problem solving, isn't it?
It's problem solving. It's, you know, it's that, you know, that difference that they know that they can be making, which I find just like I find fascinating, and I love just seeing it.
Well, as you said, change is a slow process.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think the Chinese proverb, may you live in interesting times,
Yeah.
is not necessarily a blessing, but it could also be a curse, because change, politicians always do it. Oh, we're the party for change. You know, well, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be better, but doesn't mean it's going to be worse. And often it's always worse, it seems. But if you can take elements of, say, well, this is working, but this isn't working.
Yeah.
How can we change what isn't working and improve and try new things, which may not work, but it may work, but then you learn. So the more that you do, then it's actually the byproduct of trying that takes you down paths which you otherwise wouldn't have gone down. So you can never visualize the end product, but you can commit yourself to a journey which inevitably will be a journey of discovery.
Yeah.
And throughout that journey, there will be discoveries which give you the opportunity for something incredible.
And I think that's one thing particularly with AI, that people should embrace, that just being on that journey, that being on that change, like understanding that, like, you know, learning. So I'm, you know, I'm someone who always likes to learn new things, but also, you know, do things and like often take risks, like, you know, and I think that's one thing that people need to do with AI. Just embrace it. I think that's one of my key.
Within safe zones.
Within safe zones, of course, within safe zones. And, you know, everything that we do within research, you know, we make sure that we're going through all the correct research ethical approvals, we're going through all the governance processes, making sure that we speak to our cultural guardian. All of those are signed off. You know, we have a data controller, so everything we've done.
Well, I know firsthand it is
Exactly.
highly regulated, and as in extremely high levels of. I mean, you can't really get higher than dealing with patient information. You've really got to take it super seriously,
Really.
which I know all you guys do. It's more for the audience to
Yeah,
realize.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that when we went through and I'm sure that all the processes that we had to go through and like the forms that we had to sign and checking all of those, I think that's just it's eye-opening just how many, and I think a lot of times the public aren't aware of exactly how many forms. Like, you'll be aware of all the forms because you've had to do it so many times, but how many that actually have to be signed off before it's done.
And the work behind the forms as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that aspect that I think people are unaware of.
I think when you're prepared to commit to that,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of people involved, and obviously what you're doing and our contribution, all of this is a huge amount of work because we believe there is a lot of outcomes that can be discovered and are worth it.
Yeah.
And in many other industries where they don't have that bar, they don't have that regulation, they could also move forward.
Yeah.
But I think in many ways, where there's less work involved, it's just easy, so you won't bother so much. When you really are committed to making something work, and it's a hell of a lot of work to even get to the start line, then I think that's often the challenge.
That is often the challenge, and it can be like demotivating.
But it's like fitness. You go to the gym once and you go, oh, well,
Like,
I didn't get fit.
Nah.
But it's that consistent, persistent, and then you build it into a habit, and then you learn more about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a personal trainer I knew, and I was absolutely useless at knowing anything about how to lift any weight, and he just poked my arms, that muscle there, is there even a muscle there? And then he just pointed out, and as you begin to learn, actually you can sense almost the mechanics of your arm. I wasn't aware of any of it, but when somebody points it out, you begin to realize how to take control of creating a change.
Yeah.
And I think there's two sides to this. The approach that I think we're taking and you're taking, the whole of Swellio, is you're coming to conclusions because you're learning.
Yeah, it's like a journey. Like, we're all on a journey, with the way the systems work. We're all on a journey, and even with the work that I'm doing, the part of the project that I'm working on with HCA, which is the electronic patient record system. That's also a journey, and that's, you know, everybody's coming together to hopefully put together a system that will revolutionize the way care is done within their organization, and that's their vision and their goal. So everybody's on a journey. So I think whichever aspect of healthcare we're in, it's always going to be, I think what people need to understand is that continuous learning curve. That's one thing that I've always, you know, learned while I've been in the healthcare space, is that you're always continually learning.
So from your personal perspective, I'd be fascinated to understand, what do you hope for the future?
What do I hope for the future? Well, I hope for, one thing that I would really love to see is just having systems in place and processes in place that are efficient, that are driving change, so are making, one thing that I would like to see is like people's lives being made easier, so then people can use that time to do things that have an impact on them. That's why I see the future of AI. So I've just seen things, you know, over the course of the last like 6 months within Swellio. I've just seen such a change, and I'm constantly in awe at the different things that can be done. And the future I see is, you know, all these things will have an impact to make things more efficient, so then people can do things that will be even better. That's where I see what the future to be.
And how do you think people should view AI? You've kind of alluded to it, but just to help people understand, how should they mentally absorb it, and what would be a positive and productive way to view AI?
So I think people should not be scared by the term AI or artificial intelligence. I think that's one thing that they shouldn't do. I think they should really just understand how it's going to benefit them. I think that's one of the key things, like understanding what changes will happen, because AI is happening all around us, everywhere we are, there's ways AI is being used. So it's understanding how they're going to benefit them, and just doing small things in their day-to-day, lives, using AI, so they can then see how those small changes will have bigger meaningful impacts. You can go on to like ChatGPT and type in give me a 3-day itinerary for, I just came back from Monaco, just give me a 3-day itinerary for Monaco. It can write that up for you. That's a use of AI. And it's just, so I think people need to understand how it will benefit them. I think that's what I tell, my family and friends who are not using AI as much as I am in healthcare, just to understand it and not be like, oh, AI, and turn their nose up to it. I think that's one thing. So embracing it.
So I think it's two choices then, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let AI control you, or you can control AI.
Yeah. And I think that's what's going to be one of the biggest game changers, is it's around us, and people should, there's so many like, I didn't realize, just even in my research niche background, how many different tools there are that can really support and change the way we do things. And if you're just looking at research, how many must there be in lots of other different when I just came here earlier today, Dean told me about film AI software that they're using, and just hearing about that, I wasn't aware that it could do that. So it's, I think, about, one of the things is learning and listening. I think listening is a real key thing. Like, listen to different people's opinions and views, because people will have different views on AI. So I think one of the things is being receptive to change. I think one of the most important things people need to do is be receptive to change.
I think Professor Song mentioned something along those lines. Don't be daunted by it.
Yeah. Like, don't be scared by it. Don't be frightened, because people will be frightened, but I think people are also frightened of change. So I've always been, I'm always one for change, and always like, so people not being like, learning from the change, seeing how that change will, what will that change be, some people don't like taking risks. Like, I have friends who, hate taking risks and hate doing anything like that, but just understanding, actually, is it really a risk, and what risk mitigating solutions are there? So I think it's that broader picture, and I think that's what AI people need to have, go in with that broader mindset.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, Iram, it has been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been great to be here.
Excellent.